Um, Good afternoon. I think we will kick off. We're a minute past 12. There are a few people still joining us, but I think we'll start with some introductions. I'm Lara Potter. I am the chair of the Future Skills Group with the Association of Consultancy and Engineering, and I work with Arcadis. Welcome to this Future of Consultancy masterclass. It's the last one in the series. Of the Leadership in the Digital Age masterclasses. And for those who've joined us on any of the others, welcome back. It's lovely to have you back again. So this masterclass is curated by the Future Skills Group, which is part of the Future of Consultancy workstream at the Association of Consultancy and Engineering. And as part of these masterclasses, we've already covered people, technology, and today we're going to really focus on clients and the relationships that consultants and engineers have with their clients. We are unbelievably lucky today to have joining us Chris Pike and Will Waller, both from Arcadis. Chris is a partner with Arcadis, and he also leads the rail sector and leads our strategy into the rail sector for Arcadis. And Will Waller also joins us. He's a director with Arcadis, and he's the account leader for Arcadis and leads our account for TfL, Transport for London. And really his focus is on ensuring that the clients always get the best from Arcadis as an organisation. Before we start today, if you have any questions during this session, you can type them into the chat box, and they will remain anonymous, and we will pick them up at the end. We should have 10 minutes or so at the end to answer your questions. So please pop them in as they occur to you, and then we will pick them up towards the end of the session. So probably with no further ado, I am going to hand over to Will and Chris, who will be jointly presenting this morning. Thanks very much, Will, and thanks, Chris. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Laura.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone, and I'm joining you from my home, so you get the benefit of the fact that I've got bright sunshine coming through the window, so occasionally it makes me look a bit funny on my camera, so apologies for that, but a very good afternoon to you, and welcome to this webinar. As Lara said, the last in the series around leadership in a digital age. And specifically today, we're going to be talking to you around transforming how you understand and meet client needs in this digital age. So we're going to cover today how you can keep pace with your customers, what they want, how we can convert this into insight, and how we can create compelling propositions that deliver great outcomes for our clients. Along the way, we're going to give you some tips. We're going to run through some processes with you that we use as Arcadis, but they're not exclusive to Arcadis, and also some tools that you can take away and you can apply in your world in how you go to your clients with, compelling propositions. Next slide, please. Over to you, Will.
Thank you. So this here is an extract from a previous masterclass session which captured feedback from the attendees around the challenges that they were experiencing and seeing in the market and in the market that they were operating in. And I think we just wanted to start with this and reflect on it for a moment in terms of, I think we all would recognise things in this word cloud that we all see day to day in terms of the challenges we're facing. And it's certainly reflective of the fact that clearly the market across is moving very quickly, not just because of the pandemic, but because of course, a lot of other, events and things that are happening. Okay, we've touched on, and this series is about digital change, for example, but obviously we're also seeing regulatory change. We're seeing shifts in what end customers want. We're seeing, huge pressure around kind of ESG and sustainability. So all of these things are coming together, and we're seeing an awful lot of change. So it's becoming, of course, ever more important, always has been, but ever more important to really keep up with understanding what our clients in the consultancy and engineering sectors want, need, and are looking for from their suppliers and their partners. And I think, essentially a big part of this is about how do we draw closer to our clients to understand that. Next slide, please.
Okay, so let's just unpack this a little bit. So, you know, we know through our engagement with our clients that their challenges are becoming ever more difficult, they're becoming more complex, and we need to think about things in a very different way. Historically, you know, as consultants, we've tended to sell products and services to our clients, and because their needs have changed, because of digital transformation, because of the complexity of their world and the things that they're needing to deal with, particularly with their stakeholders and the environment that they operate in, we're starting or have been framing our thinking through value propositions rather than products and services. That doesn't mean to say that products and services don't have their place, but when you're dealing with much more challenging client problems, then framing it through value propositions is more successful, and that's what we've been finding to be more successful. But first off, what is a value proposition? I remember sort of winding the clock back sort of 3 or 4, maybe 5 years within Arcadis, and we were trying to articulate to ourselves what is a value proposition, because if we can't understand it ourselves, how can we actually go to our clients and start to work with them? So a value proposition itself describes what the client buys and why they buy it. So the value is the benefit the client experiences minus any cost that they obviously have in obtaining that benefit. And of course, that also includes different risk profiles. The proposition is the what that they actually receive from us in terms of you know, addressing the challenge that they have. So if we just move on a slide, I'll just cover that in a little bit more detail. So in terms of the why, so this might be an improved user experience. It might be that it actually solves a problem or delivers a positive outcome to something that they have a challenge with. It perhaps saves them time or makes their life a little bit easier in terms of the way in which they operate their business. Perhaps, for example, it reduces the complexity of you know, the data, the information that they have flowing through their business, or perhaps it helps them to make a decision in a much more informed way, which perhaps they can roll up to a regulator or someone that looks after you know, some of their challenges, people that they need to report to. Perhaps it provides greater visibility on how they run their business, and in doing so, perhaps maybe it reduces risk and uncertainty in how they operate. So just to give you a bit of an example of that, you know, within an Arcadis world, we do quite a lot of cost reporting. And previously, cost reporting is being driven from receiving data from the customer, analysing that data, producing a cost report, and providing insights, if you like, off the back of that report. Now, typically speaking, by the time you get to the end of that reporting cycle, 3 or 4 weeks may have elapsed. And by that time, the risk that you've been highlighting to your customer is probably already manifested, at least in some part, and therefore it's costing them money, and they've lost 3 or 4 weeks in terms of how they can respond to that particular challenge. So if you were in a position whereby you could provide real-time reporting or semi-real-time reporting by using data and assembling that data and analysing it in a different way, you can see that there is value to be created for the customer. Okay, so let's just move on to what. So the what is kind of what we actually do to address that challenge. It might be a product and it might be a service that we wrap up into an overall value proposition. So it could be a digital tool or product. It could actually be providing access for the client to a particular tool, perhaps on a software as a service basis. It could be a consultancy service that we deliver to our clients. It could be using a specific digital tool to perhaps deliver that service rather than providing it as a user defined service, if you like. It gets a job done that a client needs to be done. It creates maybe a data set that we can actually use at a later date. As earlier, in the sense of doing cost planning and cost insight, we can actually codify knowledge, for example, so that we can actually use bots or things like that to process that data so that we get to an outcome and we get to the insight, which is the consultancy part, much quicker than we could in the past. And also it could be actually, you know, we're using hardware like, for example, drones to acquire data in a different way, a much more digital way. In a railway sense, that could be keeping people off the railway network, which means we've improved safety by not putting people out in harm's way. So there's lots of ways in which we can actually deal with the what, if you like. But just to cover the little piece around sort of value propositions versus products and services, and we'll come on to this a little bit later, a value proposition may wrap up within it a number of products and services. So it's about actually how we deliver that to our customer, which is shaped around really understanding the client need. And this is where I hand over to Will, who's going to take you through some approaches as to how we do that.
Thanks, Chris. So Chris has covered, you know, what we mean when we talk about a value proposition. So actually, how do we develop, not just develop value propositions for our clients, but actually great ones? So when we're thinking about the selling process, what we see on the screen here is what we might describe as the traditional approach, which historically, you know, is actually quite kind of seller focused. It can often be quite one size fits all. It perhaps is around actually, if you have something that happens to meet the client need, then great. And actually it's in a way quite one way. And so actually, if we take a step back, I think we'd all agree that that doesn't necessarily generate or realize the potential value that's there for either actually the buyer, the customer, or indeed actually. And I suppose I'll you know, pick on perhaps an example in terms of that might be just taking a kind of service, for example, cost management. That might be an example of actually, if that happens to be what the customer is looking for, then that's great. But actually that proposition isn't necessarily talking to their actual needs, which we're going to explore in a moment. So next slide, please. So actually, as Chris mentioned earlier, this isn't exclusive to Arcadis, but this third box thinking model, we think captures the essence of this very well, and we like it. And what this really describes is what the evolution from that traditional approach to selling is. And the key thing here is actually asking ourselves, how will what we do for the client elevate their own value proposition with their own customers or end users? And so actually, we're shifting the focus to the customer's customer and the end user. So what is it that they are going to be seeking? What is it that they need and want? When we actually look through that lens, it then very much becomes about how can we help our client deliver that for their customer, and how does that inform our clients what we call care abouts. So it really puts a very different spin on how we might define and also solve our clients' challenges, needs, and problems. I think also, you know, the thing about this, it really then involves having a very deep understanding of the sector, actually going in and having a very deep understanding potentially of the end customer and end user, and really in essence kind of to, you know, you're really trying to explore the value chain fully, so that you're actually really exploring what the client needs in order to deliver their desired outcomes in the most optimized way. So I think, you know, that's the key point really. Obviously you play into this other aspects of need around, you know, things like regulatory change, you know, other kind of drivers for an organization, but at its absolute heart, the approach focuses on what the need of the end user is. I suppose to bring this to life, I might actually use an example from another sector, which is, you know, a very customer focused one, which is the build to rent sector. And for those that aren't familiar, the build to rent sector, developers and investors will develop assets that are going to be held for the long term and operated purely for rent. These are residential assets that are held purely for rent. And so actually the focus on the end customer is very, very strong, because that product needs to be attractive to the customer that's going to come and rent it and hopefully stay in it for as long as possible. And so actually this is a good example where as an organization that can help the client with design, engineering, project program cost management, having a laser focus on what that end customer is going to be looking for and how that plays in delivery of a project and optimized design is absolutely crucial in terms of meeting the client's need. And that's an example of a market where we are applying this kind of thinking, for example. Next slide, please. So how do you really take that a step further and really start to sort of make that happen, I suppose, for your organization and your clients? Well, again, not exclusive to Arcadis, but this model is really helpful in structuring the thinking that goes into that process. And you start with them. So what do your customers care about? And we'll come on in a moment to a template that you could actually complete for your clients. So that's a real tool you can take away today and start using. So actually, what are their critical business issues? What will be important to them? What value do they rely on to win business with their customers? So we're really starting to think about actually what's going to help them win in their chosen market or in the market that they're playing in. And what do their customers seek? So just really repeating the point from the previous slide, making it all about the end customer. What do they actually want? And how can what we do help our client deliver that for their customers? Once you've kind of codified your thinking down on that, and that might involve a process of, research, insight gathering as well, for example, on top of what you already know, you're going to start to think about actually your organization and your capabilities, your offers, your products and services, solutions. So actually, what do you have that might play to those things that we've just talked about around them? What do you have that might play to their care abouts? And again, you could that could be existing product, service, solutions, but it might also be about defining new ones. And Chris is going to talk a little bit more about that shortly. Then it's about, of course, drawing the comparison around how does that, how does what you have impact what they care about? So really just making the link. And then, of course, as we know, when we're out there winning work, the actually crucial thing is then, of course, proving, firstly, that you can do it, and secondly, that it's obviously going to deliver the value that you've said it will deliver. Being able to provide, relevant examples and things like that is always helpful. So that really is a key kind of way to step through that process and help kind of codify your thinking. Next slide, please. Thank you very much. And so this here it's that model we just looked at, but slightly flipped and described really as a sort of relevant statement. A relevant statement being I suppose an articulation of why something should be interesting to the audience that you're giving it to. And so actually you can convert that value creation thought framework into a relevant statement, which could be applied, for example, to a specific client. And you can really start to build the picture. So in terms of them, it might be, for example, that you're putting in there, their focus is on decarbonisation. Let's take that as an example, which of course many of our major infrastructure and utility clients are very focused on. Actually, you might say we can help you with that by supporting the quantification of carbon baselines, for example, and you might well have a tool or a particular process that helps with that. The impact on your business will be that you'll then be able to you'll know where you are today, and you'll be able to measure progress going forward, and you'll be able to have an informed position from which you can define an action plan. And then the proof might be that you've actually done that for another client in a relevant sector or market. Excuse me. And you can demonstrate to this client actually that's created an environment for success in the decarbonisation space. So you can really use this as a tool to build that story and build that picture. Next slide, please. So that's one tool. This here is another tool, which is the empathy map, what we call the empathy map. It's a really fantastic tool, this one. Again, something you could take away today and start using with your clients. And you know, it's relatively straightforward and self-explanatory. You put the name of an individual in the middle there. You know, you could do it for an organization, but it's probably best done when it's for a specific individual. So it might be a key client stakeholder, for example. And you can apply the tool in a number of different ways. You could sit on your own and you could really have a think about, what is the client saying? What are they thinking? What are they feeling? And what are they doing? Now, sometimes all of those things will be relatively aligned. They'll be saying something, they'll be thinking that way, they'll be feeling positive about that, and they'll be doing something around that. But other times, actually, some of these things might be a little bit different. So that might be something that you consider on your own for an individual client stakeholder. You might actually get a group of colleagues together and build that picture for somebody otherwise. Or you could potentially, depending on the type of relationship you have with your client, might even work through that with them. And it can be a good way to structure a meeting, actually, you know, when you're engaging with your client. So there's a number of different ways you can use the tool. But really the point of the tool is to really give some thought, and again, get it down, you know, and sort of written down and structured around actually what that client is actually thinking, feeling, doing. And it's a good start point for beginning to understand what their problems, challenges, opportunities, and therefore what their needs and wants might be. And, you know, obviously the clue is in the name of the tool, the Empathy Map. It really is all about putting yourself in their shoes. Thank you. Next slide, please. Over to
the slide on one, sorry. Okay, so so Will's talked through a couple of tools there, how we can start to really understand what the customer cares about, how we unpack their challenges. And what I'm going to do now is to try and link that, if you like, to a couple of things which will help us on the journey of starting to develop our value propositions, to think in that very different way. So the first step in that process is to pinpoint, if you like, a problem statement. So what we're trying to do here is we're trying to take all of the knowledge that we got through the direct engagement with the customer to try and understand what their challenge is, and we use that to shape a problem statement. And the problem statement is kind of there so that as a team we have a collective understanding, if you like, on how we articulate it, because actually all of us hear things in different ways. We might assemble the data in a different way, and this is very much done in a group environment. You know, when we develop value propositions within our business, within Arcadis, we generally have a very broad group of people, so that what we try and avoid is kind of groupthink. So people who are maybe from the same sector or maybe from a similar background in terms of how they, or the role, the job they have within the business, maybe they have a similar mindset. So if we can get that kind of diversity of thinking, so we bring in legal, we bring in commercial, we bring in delivery people, we bring in client development people into that forum, we actually have that diversity of thinking, and all of those opinions have a very different take, if you like, on the problem that the client has. So there's a lot of work to be done in diversity, if you like, about thinking, and including as many people, as many views as possible in formulating both the problem statement, but also then building the value proposition off the back of it. And it's actually really quite simple. You know, this is a way in which we assemble a problem statement. So it goes somewhere along the lines of, how might we help a user, your client, do something, so something they need to get done in order to get some form of benefit. So underneath here we've got a very simple, if you like, example of that. So how might we help a local cafe optimize their selection of products to improve customer satisfaction. So within that, we can see that the user there is the local cafe or the cafe owner. We can see that the do something is the enablement, if you like, of selecting products, and the benefit is to improve customer satisfaction, but ultimately, obviously, to improve the amount of goods that they sell through the cafe. And we can scope out a problem statement for pretty much anything, if you like. So it just requires that kind of mindset, if you like, in thinking about how we shape the client challenge. And this little formula around how we build up a problem statement is quite a simple way that can be really written down around most client problems. And it helps us to just share that problem openly and then get around how do we create a solution. So we just move on one slide, thank you. So that then brings us to kind of how do we start to build a value proposition, because actually sometimes it can seem quite overwhelming as to kind of how we do that. Now this model, which is, it's not an Arcadis model, this is actually something called a company called Strategizer who developed this. So go away and Google it. You'll find lots of stuff on the web, on YouTube around Strategizer, and there's some really useful videos that just help you to kind of get an understanding of how this works. But this is what's called a value proposition canvas. It's comprised of two parts. So on the right, the circular bit, you've got the customer profile, and on the left, you've got the value map. So I'm just going to unpick those kind of one at a time. So linking very, very closely to what Will's been talking about is the customer profile. So in the center of the circle there, you'll see a little person. That might be an individual client, that might be a client organization. It doesn't matter. It really relates to the problem statement that you are trying to create a value proposition for. So the first part really is understanding what is the job that needs to be done. Okay, so this is the definition of the job a customer needs to get done in order to run their business, to serve their customers or achieve some form of success. So you can see by having that really open dialogue, that empathy with the client, we need to build a picture of what really matters to them. What is it they're trying to achieve to meet their business objective? Now, along the way within that, there'll be some pains and there'll be some gains. So if I just deal with each of those two bits separately. So the gains really are the positive outcomes which the customer hopes to achieve in order to get their aspirations. So we can start to really, drive down into that in terms of, conversations with the customer. And this might be, we have a number of shaping conversations, if you like, in order to get to the point where we've built a customer profile that we can then start to develop a value map from. Okay, and then you've got the pains, which are some of the negative outcomes which they're hoping to avoid. Now that might include risks, that might be, I've previously tried to do this and in doing so I've encountered these problems. So already what you're doing is you're beginning to understand some pain points that they have, that they're wanting to avoid. So they might have tried to fix this problem previously, had a bad experience, had a load of pain that they've suffered as a consequence. It might be a regulatory issue, for example. So we can see that there's some challenges there, some pains that we're going to need to develop our value proposition so that we avoid those things happening again. Okay. Just flipping to the left-hand side, the value map. This is now more about how, as a consultancy business, we start to respond, if you like, to that customer profile, the job they need to get done, and the pains and the gains that they hope to achieve or they hope to avoid in doing so. So on the very left-hand side in the little triangle, you've got products and services, and we talked about this earlier. So a value proposition might be assembled from a number of different products and services that you already have within the locker, if you like. It might also include things that you may need to develop, a new app, a new digital tool. It might be a different piece of consultancy, perhaps, that you've not ventured into before. It might actually involve going out and getting some ecosystem partners to help you to deliver what the customer needs that perhaps you can't do within your organization, but actually if you pull in some partners that do something different and you collaborate and you form that ecosystem, that actually you can do it together. Okay, so then just going to the gain creators and the pain relievers. So I'll deal with the positive bit first. So the gain creators, so this describes how the products and services create and maximize the outcomes and benefits which the customer expects, what they perhaps are or would be surprised by. So this is slightly American language, if you like, but essentially what it is that you're trying to really match your value proposition to exactly what it is that they're trying to gain. You're trying to give them a real benefit out of the value proposition that you're developing for them. To the bottom, the pain relievers are the things that are there that are trying to turn those pains into a positive outcome. So it might be that there is a pain that they would experience which they can't avoid, but actually by relieving that pain, you're actually creating a solution that actually addresses the job that they need to be done. Okay, now I'll try and so between those two things, so the customer profile and the value map, what you're trying to do there in the middle is create fit, if you like, and that goes back to one of the earlier models that Will had, is that the them, us, fit proof, is that you've got the them, which is the customer profile, you've got the map, which is the us, and then you're trying to create that kind of fit in the middle. And then of course what you're trying to do is you're trying to say, well, okay, how can I prove that? So customers generally want to see proof that actually you've done some of these things before, because that gives them greater confidence. Customer who has you've worked with before that would be willing to give you a reference, or actually speak to your customer to say, you know, we've done this before with this organization, we've had success, and that we can give that reference for them. Now, what this does from a consultancy point of view is it perhaps puts us in a very different space. It allows us to move into markets, sectors, or areas of addressing client need, which perhaps we haven't been able to do before. And as Arcadis, we've experienced that. So I'll give you a kind of a couple of examples, and they're very much tied to perhaps digital transformation, and topically, if you like, they're tied to a sustainable angle, if you like. So we have a couple of value propositions that we developed over a couple of years, and they're actually now both in working and delivering to our customers. So the first one is called Fleet to Zero. What this is a value proposition which is built around enabling our customers, typically customers who have large fleets of vehicles, typically diesel vehicles, combustible fuel type vehicles, and it's helping them to transform those fleets to electric fleets. Now, in terms of trying to achieve that for big client organizations, there's lots of things that they need to consider. There's, you know, the age of the vehicles that they've got, the use of the vehicles that they've got, the depots that they may have, and where those vehicles have to travel to on a daily basis. There might be all sorts of issues around long-term leasing that they've got. Do they have the ability at the site to be able to charge those vehicles? Do they have the infrastructure? How do they go about doing that? Do some of those vehicles get taken home at night? In which case, how do they operate that fleet? So Fleet to Zero was a proposition which was built around tackling that client challenge and bringing together a set of skills, consultancy-based skills around providing that service that helps our customers to transform their fleets. And this is something that we've done with customers like, for example, Metropolitan Police, who operate a huge fleet across London. And we did a piece of work with them, which is helping them now to go on that pathway of converting their fleet to electric vehicles. But when we started really getting into it, we then said, well, actually, there's a second part to this. There's the bit that sort of helps them to kind of go, how am I going to get there? How am I going to achieve what I want to achieve? But then there's a second part that says, well, somehow they've got to get the infrastructure in place to enable them to actually make the conversion and run that fleet from an electric vehicle point of view. So we created a second value proposition called Ultra EV, which was a collaboration between us and a company that provides the charging infrastructure, which was then about is in a point where they want to make the conversion. We can provide an end-to-end service that they say, yes, we want to convert our fleet, and we can then provide the charging infrastructure and all the wraparound consultancy services, including design, including program management, including cost estimating, to get them to the point where they need to. So it's a turnkey service to provide that charging infrastructure that they need to operate an electrical fleet. And both of those value propositions were built through a value proposition canvas, and they were built through a full-blown business model that then starts to contemplate the commercial, the partnering options, the selling channels, and all of those kind of things that you would need to set this up as a proper business model and make the case for it within your business and be able to articulate to your customer. We just move on to the next slide. So I'm just going to very quickly summarize kind of what we've gone through today. And then I think hopefully there's been some Q&A coming in the chat as we've been going, but I'm sure you may have some questions as we flip to the Q&A session. So what we've done today is we tried to really kind of focus really right down on understanding client need. So we talked at the very beginning around some of the things that you've identified as challenges within your business in the way that you deliver your service to your customers. And what we tried to do is to focus this presentation around giving you some really helpful tools that will enable you to practically go out and have those conversations. And I think, as we found as an organization, it does take some skill, it does take some tools and some processes and some practice to be able to have that confidence to go out and have a very different conversation with your customer than perhaps you've tried to have in the past. But all I would say from experience is that we found that customers respond to it really well. If you go in and start to really understand their challenges, it's amazing how quickly they open up. And even the hardest of customers that perhaps maybe you feel aren't necessarily always that good to deal with, or you have a good experience, they do start to open up. And perhaps if you've done your homework before and maybe you can put some insight in the room around things that you know about their business, it will help them to just open up and get the conversation flowing. We talked about value propositions, how they deliver value to our customers and how you go about doing it. We've used or taken you through the empathy map so that we can use kind of an outside in and an end customer focused thinking to really shape the value proposition that we're trying to create. Talked about how you can leverage tools to structure your thinking. We've given you some tools that you can take away and use and see how you get on. And we didn't touch upon business models, but where I've talked about the developing the new value proposition, behind that sits a business model. And perhaps maybe in a future session, we can come back to you and talk to you about how you convert that value proposition into a proper business model canvas. But if you want to go away and have a bit of a look at that, again, Google that through Strategizer, and you'll find some really good examples. But one of the things that we've learned as a business, and I touched upon it earlier, is that success in doing this is around diversity of thinking, about getting a diverse group of people in the room and working across functions and partnering and co-creating. Actually, the very best way to do this is to be in a position whereby you open the customer up to a challenge they have and they start to articulate it to you. And actually, rather than us going away in isolation in developing a value proposition, why not co-create it together in a design thinking type way? And that's where we have found the greatest success, when we've worked hand in hand with our customers. Perhaps we've brought other parts into that process to assist, and it's amazing what you can come up with. So I think that's all from us. Thank you very much. Hopefully you've enjoyed it, and I'm going to pass you to Lara, who's going to curate the Q&A.
Thank you very much, Chris, and thank you, Will. What fantastic insight, actually. I've just learned an enormous amount. It feels like the shift in the way that we're thinking around how we work with our clients is really changing very rapidly at the moment. And I think you kicked off with this messaging around, the complexity of our market, and you mentioned sustainability a few times. Our clients are dealing with problems that they've not had to deal with previously, and their opportunity. I mean, Chris, you mentioned digital transformation a few times. Their opportunity to apply thinking in different ways, of course, has also changed enormously. And in some ways, it's as much for us as consultants to try and keep that understanding and keep connected with their problems. So really fantastic ways of thinking about that. And we've had a few questions coming in. So I am going to kick off. I'm going to start at the top with the first question that's come in. Really wonderful question, actually, which takes it one step further. So the question here is, the statement first of all, that the client is a starting point for data. The empathy map is fantastic, great start. So they've said that, but what one does not know about the situation is also important. So question really here is, to break out of business as usual, do you also need to know other information and data beyond perhaps that original conversation? And very specifically, then, does that help to trigger innovation around some of these complex problems? And the question there is, where would that data come from? So I don't know who wants to start with that. Will, you're nodding.
Yeah, happy to take that.
Yeah,
happy to. So I think for me, the answer is probably in three parts. So the first one is, I suppose, in a sense, market research, but particularly with a kind of global view. So, I think it can be very beneficial to have a look at what's going on elsewhere in the world. How are others tackling these problems? In many places that they might be ahead of what's going on in the UK, for example. So we can always look to learn from that kind of thing in terms of the data as well. I think the second bit is just engage very closely with clients. So I think if there's things that you don't know kind of thing, actually sometimes talking to the client can help unlock some of that as well. So that's another key one. And I think the third one really is just, generally staying close to the market and actually engaging often in your own organization as well, and just seeing what can be unlocked, because, once people start sharing ideas and sharing what they're seeing, actually, I think we often find you can build a very rich picture just from taking the time to make sure you've actually got everything that everyone knows kind of out in the open, as it were. So those are the three things I'd say.
Thanks very much, Will. I'm sure, Chris, you've got a few things that you'd like to add to that as well, maybe some experiences as well.
Yeah, no, maybe just take perhaps a slightly different tack around the data angle. So, David, great question, by the way, because I read it and I was nodding furiously and agreeing with you. So, data's fantastic, and I think being able to get into client data and being able to provide analysis and insight around that data just provides so many great opportunities. Now, I guess one of the challenges that we have is that many clients at the moment aren't necessarily providing open source data, if you like. So data is collected for any number of different reasons, and as consultants, if we could get access to that data, there's so much more that we could do to help. Now, clearly, everyone's going on a transformation around, data analytics and the value of that. But the more that we start to really open that up, I think there's more opportunity to really improve the way in which our client organizations run. So we can start to really get into that. And we found that, use of data has been absolutely fantastic. We have that within our business, and it will link to perhaps a later question around skills. But from our own experience, we have a number of propositions that very much focus around taking data and analysing that data and then providing an improved outcome from that data. That's a really important element. The second bit probably builds a little bit on Will's comment around being able to go to a global model. So we very specifically used data around benchmarking. So we had that we responded to a call from Network Rail around efficiency, if you like, and how efficient the business is. And what we did is we took data from within their business, but we also correlated that with data from other regulated industries within the UK, and also similar client organisations globally that we also work with. And therefore we were able to provide a huge amount of insight to Network Rail around what, for example, the pound and ground costs are for other clients, other industries, to help them to benchmark where they were. And then from that, the consultancy piece was around, okay, so now we know where you sit, what do we do about it? What are the triggers? What are the main components that make up the challenge that you can then start to really knuckle down on in terms of finding. David, I really absolutely agree with you. To break out of business as usual, data's absolute gold. And the more that we can get into the data, the more that we can do.
Thanks very much, Chris. Thanks, Will. Perhaps that's a really fantastic segue actually into the next question, which is actually something that's very at my heart, I'm passionate about, which is about skills. Because actually some of the things that you're talking about don't necessarily sit with the traditional groups, or maybe it's something about upskilling. So question to you really, have you found that the skills required to take this approach exists in the workplace already? Or is this something for upskilling, or do we also need something a little bit different as well?
Shall I maybe take that initially, Will? And so sure,
yeah.
Probably yes and no to some extent. So I think I touched upon earlier in the development of the sort of the value proposition and understanding the kind of client need, that it's really much a team sport. And we found that getting diversity of thinking from within our organization is absolutely the right way to go. You know, we always surprise ourselves in terms of, you know, the things that we come up with when we have a really truly diverse room, if you like. So I operate within rail, but, you know, I've had people in sessions that have been from aviation, I've had people from property, I've had people from our resilience business. So, and also I've had, you know, lawyers, I've had commercial people. So getting that real diversity of thought is really important. In terms of the upskilling, absolutely. I mean, when I look at our organization, I was chatting to one of my colleagues working on HS2 at the moment, and we've developed a digital PMO to help us to deliver and demonstrate delivery of 9,000 deliverables, if you like, within that particular project. And we're using APIs and data and all that kind of stuff to bring information out of multiple systems and assemble it so that we don't only use it to demonstrate to the customer that we are achieving and that we can address the KPIs that we've been set, but actually that we use it to manage our own priorities, if you like, within the business. So when you've got so many deliverables going on, how do you make sure the right people pick up the right things at the right time to deliver something that's going to happen in 5-6 months time? And in order to do that, we've had to change the skill set within our business. So we're now employing pure data scientists, if you like. Now, if someone had said to me 5 years ago, would we be employing data scientists, I probably would have shook my head and not quite understood the question. But when I look at it today and I look at the value that people like that bring within our business, actually you go, it's a no-brainer. Why wouldn't we have those people? Because we need a very different skill set to be able to unlock the opportunities that lie ahead of us in a digital age. So yes, 100%, we do need to consider the skill set. We need to bring new people, new skills into our business, but we also need to upskill our own staff. And one way we've done that within our organization is Expedition DNA, which was one of our major stakeholders, Loven Clan Foundation, funded a program whereby all Arcadis people globally could engage in a structured learning program, and they could upskill in terms of the digital agenda.
So I think I'd agree with all that, and I think a couple of builds probably. So on the skills point, I think key message probably to pull out of this isn't you know, for only a certain kind of person or something like that over here. You know, this is for everybody. You know, these tools can definitely be used by everybody. I think what we have probably seen is, and another thing Arcadis has done actually is we've invested in something called the Client Focus Academy, which we've rolled out across our business, which is about helping our colleagues experience these tools and be able to take them away and start using them. So I think there's an element of carving out the time for people to get to grips with the tools so they can go and use them. And so I suppose that's you know, probably can be described as upskilling, but I think the key message is this is for everybody to get involved with, for sure. Yeah, I think I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Will. Thanks, Chris. I love that message. It is for everybody. This is thinking that's relevant right the way across our sector. But I do have a very specific question. So, Will and Chris, you're talking from the perspective of a large organisation. ACE have very many SME organisations as members, and I wonder whether many of them have quite well-defined products or services. And I wondered whether, what your thoughts are as to how this sort of thinking might apply to them. Both of you have mentioned partnerships, you've mentioned wider ecosystems, but I wonder whether you can think about how this is applied into a smaller organisation where perhaps, you know, the value propositions or the services, products might you know, necessarily be more limited in what they're doing and the way they're working with their clients.
Perhaps I can comment first. Yes, I think you know, this stuff is exciting, really exciting for big organisations like Arcadis, but in a way, it's almost you know, it's as or maybe even more exciting, I think, for SMEs, because probably there's a huge opportunity for SMEs in terms of actually typically, you know, we're pretty agile, but typically SMEs might be able to be even more agile. And as you say, you know, bigger organisations are going to be looking to work with SMEs. And I think this comes from the sort of, in my view, the basic standpoint, which is in the world we're now living in, problems are becoming, in a way, so complex that actually it's pretty rare if one organisation can deal with them on their own. So I think that drive towards ecosystems, collaboration represents a huge opportunity for all of us. But as I say, that agility point is also key as well.
Thanks, Will.
I can only wholeheartedly agree with everything that Will has said, and I think, you know, the collaboration has to be there. And I think what you know, the two types of organisation, you know, the bigger organisations plus SME, it's compatible because, you know, organisations like ourselves have access to market through frameworks that perhaps SMEs don't, and we don't always have the kind of agility that small SMEs have in terms of developing things. So there's an immediate collaboration there. I think in terms of smaller consultancies who perhaps also are trying to find an edge, I think, you know, these tools are quite straightforward, and, you know, any good kind of account planning, you know, trying to find an edge around winning a particular piece of work, you can put them to good use on any of those things. So they're going to be equally applicable to big or small organizations.
Thanks both. I'm going to just fit in one final question, which I guess takes that question to the next level, which is, okay, so we can think about collaboration, but when, you know, when the rubber hits the road, how do you approach reward and KPIs, etc., in those sorts of complex collaborative partnership type events? I don't know if you've got any examples or thoughts about how that works to the benefit of all organisations.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you know, commercial relationships aside, I think the and obviously that usually gets ironed out one way or another. I think the important thing, and we haven't addressed it here today, but, you know, as we talked about before, maybe there's a follow-up to this around the business model, is that when you take that value proposition into a full-blown business model, there's what's called the viability element of it, and the viability looks at the cost structure and it looks at the reward mechanism, and within that you address, you know, KPIs that you're going to have with the customer and how you get reimbursed for the work that you've done. And within that, you also have to consider how the working relationship is going to be between you know, the lead organization, or if you're JV partners and with supply chain. And, you know, for a collaboration to be truly collaborative, it's got to work for everyone. You know, you can't believe that you're going to continue operating as a long-term venture if all the people that are involved in it don't get out of it what they need to get in terms of, you know, commercial settlement. So it's really got to work for everyone. And I think when you build the business model, you really contemplate how it's going to work within, and also really importantly, what type of model you're going to use for reimbursement with the customers. So I mentioned earlier things like software as a service, you know, might be one way that you deliver something, but, you know, there could be any different numbers of ways in which, you know, different types of business model that you apply. And I think the important thing is, in terms of moving to value propositions, is getting a real clear understanding of what the revenue recovery mechanism is, so that it delivers value for the customer, and it also delivers the how do I explain, the sort of the commercial benefit, if you like, to the organizations that are providing it. Otherwise it's not a sustainable business model.
I agree with all that, and I think I'll just build by saying essentially the beauty of this approach and this process is that actually you know, one of the outcomes is that everybody's objectives are aligned around the end customer, and so I think that is, you know, playing to what Chris was just saying around the realization of value. In essence, the value realization should all be aligned, and I think the nice thing on a personal level is, as well, of course, a lot of us have come into this industry because we want to make a difference to the lives of end users. And so, you know, as far as I can see, that actually this kind of approach really, and that alignment of objectives should, in theory at least, work for everybody.
Lovely. What a wonderful way to end this session, Will. It's for everybody, and we're in it to make improvements to the end customer. So thanks very much for that. So I think we're pretty much out of time. I just want to thank Will and Chris very much for pulling that together and gifting us a few tools that are in their current toolkits and that they're finding useful. A really wonderful insight into the world of client relationships, consultants relationships. Really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
We will send, or ACE will send all attendees the recording of this webinar in the next few days, so you have access to that, and I think you have access to that through the website as well. So the only thing left for me to say is thanks very much for joining. Really appreciate you joining us today. I hope you found it useful, and we look forward to seeing you on future events for the AC. Thanks ever so much. Have a lovely day.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.